On today's show, we'll be breaking down the game of Mason West, a dual sport athlete between hockey and football as a quarterback who may just end up being a first round draft selection if he ends up opting for hockey as his sport of choice.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're going to be diving into the game of a player that I loved in the back half of the season, especially during his stint in the USHL. Right at the end of the campaign, where he got into 10 regular season games with the Fargo Force. Mason West, a very interesting, big 6'6" forward who has a lot of runway, but is very, very raw. So he's a player that we're going to be delving into today. He's young for the draft class, mainly played in high school hockey. And in the first segment, we'll be delving into his overall profile, as well as the quality of his tools, the skating, the shot, the physicality, the handling, and the playmaking. And then we'll be moving on in the second segment to more of the mental attributes. How intelligent is he? How do his habits support his overall game? And what is his runway at the end of the day? And finally, we'll wrap up the show by looking ahead a little bit with our predictions and projections for him at the NHL level. Where is he going to go on draft day? What is his absolute ceiling at the NHL level? And which NHL players play similar styles to this player? All that and more coming up here on today's episode. But before we dive into it, today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, Mason West, he's a very interesting player that you may not know all that much about at this stage. He's a bit under the radar in terms of most of the players that are being talked about in this draft class. If you're super tuned in, then yes, you're definitely familiar with this name already. But in case you're not, he is a very, very interesting profile. At 6'6", 207 pounds, as a right shot, right winger, he can play kind of across the forward line, but I think a right wing projection is the easiest, but he can play both sides as well. He's an August 3rd, 07 birthday, so just a month and a half off that 2026 draft cutoff, so definitely on the younger side of this year's class. And he split this year's season between Edina High in the Minnesota high school circuit, where he scored 27 goals and 49 points in 31 games, as well as the Fargo Force in the USHL, where he played in 10 regular season games, scoring a single goal and 9 points in that stretch. This is a guy that showed his ability to translate his tools to the USHL pace, to that level of hockey. And while there are definitely some inconsistencies and aspects that are very raw in his game, as we'll be digging into, especially in the second segment, I first wanted to focus on the quality of the tools. And there is a lot to dig into here, and quite a lot of pieces here that I think NHL scouting staffs are going to be very excited about. But there's one very important asterisk with this player, and I prefaced it a little bit in that introduction. This is a dual sport athlete who has yet to actually commit to either hockey or football. He played high school football with the Edina High this season. He was the quarterback as a junior. He put up, I believe it was 37 touchdown passes to just 3 interceptions, a really, really good ratio. If you are not a football fan, he put up really good numbers there in high school football, but is about the 150th ranked quarterback going into college football for next season. So he's a bit of like a C or D tier a prospect in terms of quarterbacks going into high school. He's viewed as a really good kind of player, but not a perhaps standout prospect in the sense that he is in hockey. And I think that he's a bit more of a unique profile in hockey. There's a lot to kind of dig your teeth into in this player's toolkit, but also in some of the underlying habits, as we'll be discussing later on in the show. So what makes this player stand out so much? Mason West is a very, very smooth skater. West moves with great agility and overall fluidity in his skating. He has a pretty deep stride as well. Good stride extensions, mechanically quite gifted as a skater, but it really is in that adaptability, fluidity, lateral mobility that he stands out as being well above average, not just at his size, but in general as a projection. And at 6'6" and an August birthday, you're already starting to see some of the reasons that he's an exciting talent for NHL organizations. But it definitely does not just end there. In terms of physicality, of course, at 6'6", over 200 pounds, there is a real physical advantage there for this player. But what excites me the most is how unrefined he is physically. There's so much room to develop his physical impact at the next level. He's still very raw as a prospect in that regard. In terms of the physical habits, he's a guy who doesn't really get low. He's quite upright in his physical confrontations. So he doesn't really have leverage on his side at all. And still was able to win puck battles and push opponents off. He's a pretty strong upper body, especially. But those lower body habits in terms of getting engaged in battle, that's definitely something that has a lot of room to grow. And yes, he's going to have to do work to progress on that front. But what excites me is just how much more effective of a player he's going to become when he makes those changes. And he's already quite exciting as he's currently built. Moving on, we have the handling ability. And this is something that has really flashed quite brightly in my viewings, but overall is probably about a 5 grade on our EP ranking scale, which goes from a 1 to a 9. And a 5 is basically your baseline NHL average kind of projection. And I think the handling, in terms of habits and stuff, pulls it down a little bit, but in terms of just a tool on its own, he has a pretty unlocked top hand, really creative in his handling maneuvers, and I think that the hands match the fluidity of his skating really, really well. He's a guy that's able to pull off some really gorgeous sequences with handling at pace through different layers of defenses, but things can break down. And overall, I think that the handling is something that could grow to an above average projection with some specific tool development down the stretch. In terms of passing, it's kind of along the same lines. There are some flashes of 6.5 level playmaking ability, but they come maybe like 2 times a game, 3 times a game. They're relatively sporadic. So with this play, you're kind of banking on those flashes, on harnessing this ability down the stretch, but the consistency isn't quite there at this stage. Still, as a playmaker, he's a guy that I've seen taking really big steps over the course of this season in terms of being proactive and opportunistic, using the boards as a playmaking tool, and also maybe shooting for rebounds rather than just shooting for a shot on goal to score, or even going for a pass, but using goaltenders and using pads as playmaking tools as well. Like, he was really expanding his arsenal of playmaking ability as the year progressed, and especially down the stretch with Fargo, in combination with Matthew Lansing, who's a very intelligent, two-way, hardworking, high-end skating centerman, was really able to connect on some gorgeous give-and-go plays off the rush. And on top of that, was also really able to flash a level of foresight and intelligence and dynamic creativity in terms of the ideas he was coming up with, even if the execution was a little bit lacking sometimes. Lastly here, the shot, I also think, is a really solid tool. Good power, mechanically relatively gifted. Again, those fluid hands and feet work really nicely in combination with that shot. But overall, I think in terms of his shooting habits, Mason West is a guy that got a lot more selective with his moments in the USHL as he began to settle in there as the end of the season progressed. And I mean, it was only a 12-game stint if you include the playoffs, but still, I thought that you saw over the course of those games a real level of arrival and progression as he got settled in at that level. So in terms of shooting, I think that because he has power, he has a lot of good scoring habits in terms of off puck positioning as well as we'll be digging into in the next segment that support the goal scoring, I think he is an above average shot projection. But that wraps things up here for the first segment. In the next one, we'll be talking about the hockey sense, the habits, and the toolkit as a whole, how the tools coalesce together and work off of each other. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food deliveries. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep this episode rolling, digging into the game of Mason West of the Fargo Force. And again, a very, very interesting player. And because he's yet to select a sport yet, he has yet to commit to a college as well. So his future remains very up in the air. Apparently, he's going to decide on his kind of like commitment to sport before the draft combine. And I mean, the combine is coming up literally next week. So that is on the horizon. And I'll be very curious to see what his decision ends up being, because it's going to have massive effects on his draft stock. He's either going to be a early second, late first option, or he's going to be like a mid-round pick based on if he selects football. Of course, there is a much lower likelihood of him ending up in the NHL. But let's dive into the intelligence and the habits here for the second segment. As I mentioned in the first, he's a very raw player, and everything is still kind of coming together. There are very bright flashes, but they remain just flashes. And if you're banking on that, if you're spending a top 40, top 45 draft selection, you better be very sure that those flashes will be able to grow into something a lot more cohesive in a couple years' time. But I've seen enough in my viewings to be quite confident in that being the case. Mason West has shown such a degree of scanning frequency and awareness. It's so clear that he's a quarterback in football. As somebody who played football growing up, I know the sport very well. It is easily like among my three big sports I follow very closely, which are obviously hockey, football, and other football, like European football. But in terms of the football habits, it's that head on a swivel and also the efficiency of scanning that impressed me really, really a whole bunch by the end of the season. Mason West is constantly looking at his option. He has a mental map of the ice at all times with all of his surroundings. And that awareness, that situational awareness, has allowed him to be really quite effective in his improvisations as well in the offensive zone, where his skating and handling abilities come together for some really bright flashes. And overall, he's a player I think who has just so much runway. It's the word I keep coming back to with this player, runway. There's so much room to grow, and he's a very exciting projection. If everything comes together, I think there's a real top six upside at the NHL level with this player, but still a guy that is going to need quite a few years to get to that level. These inconsistencies, I think, are very much down to him being firstly, dual sport athlete who was playing in high school this season and really was just dipping his toes into like USHL hockey at the very, very end of the campaign. So a guy who is still quite new to like high end hockey infrastructure, whether it be the training staff or the coaching or any of these elements, is still quite new to him. He's really a blank slate in terms of a power forward with skill and intensity and IQ. All these abilities will be able to be harnessed and channeled into any of a given number of directions once he is selected, if he does, of course, select hockey as his sport of choice down the stretch. But I think that moldability is going to really rise his draft stock if he does commit to hockey, because scouting staffs and NHL organizations are always looking for players that they're going to be able to mold for their own specific needs in their organization, especially when they're big, young for a class, playing in a lower level of hockey and just progressing up the ranks right now. There's so much to look forward to with this profile. But in terms of how the different abilities in his game work off of each other, I think the skating is really a fundamental aspect here. Because the physicality remains a bit raw, it's not the tool that has the most ripple effects on the rest of his game. It really has been the skating in my viewings. He moves up and down the ice with real efficiency. He's constantly getting back into defensive positions. And that motor, both on the forecheck and on the back check, is a real area of strength for this guy. So I think that he has a solid fallback game as well to play in a bottom six in the NHL if the skill doesn't quite elevate him to a like middle six or second line capacity at the end of the road. But that skating ability is something that is going to make those transitions so much easier, and it's one of the big reasons that his jump to the USHL did prove quite smooth at the end of the day because he moves well, reads play quickly, and is just positionally quite sound on both sides of the puck. And that positional awareness in the offensive zone in terms of reading his line mates and their movements and finding little pockets of soft ice. He's constantly kind of making micro adjustments to his positioning, and he's a guy I really appreciated in terms of those details on in terms of just awareness and the situational awareness on its own. The details in a lot of other aspects are still lacking and still being built and constructed, and where there are sometimes and very absent others, but that intelligence in terms of where he needs to be, where everyone else is on the ice, where the puck is, was really a consistent element in my viewings this year. In terms of the physical habits, we talked about this a bit in the first segment, but they're still so raw and have so much runway in terms of initiating contact, gaining leverage, getting underneath opponents, and just being a beast in battles. This isn't there just yet. He's still a very raw player in physical areas, but still a guy that with that size, with that weight, with that intensity and intelligence, I think will be able to really grow and grow into that kind of role down the road. So a player that I think is going to be really versatile down the stretch wherever he does end up going on draft day. If he selects hockey, this is a guy where like the sky's kind of the limit, and there's a lot of potential in terms of also a diversity of directions that his development could be taken. But lastly, to wrap up this segment, I also wanted to mention a little bit that the creativity of thought, the ideas that this player comes up with on puck as a playmaker, as a shooter, as a puck handler, are always really, really creative. The execution isn't always like the best. Like he was imprecise in certain moments in terms of passing behind teammates or being a bit of like a half second behind a certain like sequence in the offensive zone. But the ideas he comes up with, and the things he spots with the puck on his stick in terms of passing options or shooting lanes or moments where he's able to deceive one defender in order to have a clear lane in on goal. These are all things I think are real strengths for Mason West. And that is, I think, really the crux of what makes him so exciting to me is that on top of the skating and the size and the youth and the raw development, he's a very intelligent player. And I saw him learning game to game to game to game in the USHL. I watched 5 of his like 12 games there in the USHL, and truly chronologically there was a pretty consistent progression. There's one exception in like a back-to-back game where in the second half he was just quite tired and looked a bit gassed, but beyond that one, he was just really, really solid in building game after game and also growing chemistry with the players he was playing with. He combined wonderfully with Matthew Lansing, and in terms of that projecting to the next level, in terms of being a good skill complement to a hardworking, two-way, smooth skating center, I think that has some real potential as well in the NHL if he ends up settling in a middle six capacity. Those centers often have similar traits to what Matthew Lansing brought at the USHL level. But that wraps up this second segment. In the next one, we're going to wrap things up with our predictions of where he goes on draft day, what his ceiling and floor are at the NHL level, which player comps suit him best, and which NHL teams will make the best fits on draft day. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, looking ahead a little bit with Mason West at where he might go on draft day and what his overall upside is. So, in terms of draft range, again, there's a massive asterisk with this player. So, if it comes out that he's choosing football, you can throw this into the garbage bin, basically. But if he does select hockey, I think this is a guy that's going to go between 30th and 45th overall on draft day, either one of the last picks of the first round or first half of the second round kind of prospect, because again, he has so much runway, and we've seen players with somewhat similar profiles in recent seasons go relatively high. I mean, Dean Letourneau last season of the Boston Bruins got selected, 26th overall? It was in the late 20s, and he's a player that was bigger and more raw than Mason West. But still, I think that West has a more cohesive base to work off of. With Letourneau, it's always been high-end handling, some flashes of things coming together, but a lot of inconsistencies beyond that. And with West, you have also, I think, better skating than Letourneau had. And on top of that, you have high-end intelligence and a variety of tools that are still just getting better, especially that physicality. Letourneau just bullied everyone at his level last season, and was kind of overwhelmed by the pace and physicality at the college level while making that jump this year. I think Mason West, I would hope he's taking another year in the USHL if he chooses hockey next season. But if he does make that leap, I think that he has a lot of these off puck support habits in terms of positioning to make that leap a lot easier than it was for Letourneau. And that alone should make him even maybe like up to 25th overall if a team really likes him in the first round. I wouldn't count that out. I think it's entirely possible because he's a high school player, so much room to grow. Yeah, he's raw, but imagine this player being like the forward version of Sam Renzel. Remember a couple of years ago when Sam Renzel was going through the draft, he was also a Minnesota high school player. He played in the USHL and flashed high-end skating, some elements of physicality, but a lot of raw habits. And then year after year in the NCAA, because he's a player who is very, very, he's a sponge in terms of learning and just continuously grew his game year after year, became more daring, more confident on puck, defensively physical. Then he jumps to the NHL this season and was in less than 10 games with the Blackhawks, their best defenseman, and playing like 26 minutes a night. This guy just made a really great transition through from high school to the NCAA to the NHL. And I think that Mason West has some similar qualities in terms of how raw he is, the physical development stage he's at, how young he is for the draft class, the amount he played in the USHL being relatively comparable to Sam Renzel's 5 games he played with the Waterloo Blackhawks in his draft year. There's a lot of links there, and I think that West also has a degree of special abilities in his tools, in his habits, in the way he approaches the game. He's quite unique, and Sam Renzel was just that as well. So that is something that I think bodes relatively nicely. So he should be going in that top 45 range if I were a betting man. But again, I would not place any bets before he commits to a sport. Moving on, we have the ceiling and floor. I think that if he reaches his ceiling, we're talking about a very toolsy second line kind of player. I think middle six is the overall upside, but if he really, really hits, second line power forward who has a lot of creativity and skill, high end intelligence and effort. He's a guy that is just an explosive skater and will be able to be a real rush threat, I think, at the NHL level if he hits that kind of peak, scoring maybe 25 to 30 goals and 60 to 65 points when he's in his prime. That's the level of play I can see him attaining. And if you can get that with a second round draft pick, oh my God, that's like an absolute home run swing. So that is, I think, a possibility for this player. But in terms of floors, it's a bit more risky because, of course, he is more raw. And I mean, the absolute floor is him picking football and ending up as a quarterback rather than a right winger. So the floor is as low as any player in this draft class. But if he does choose hockey, I think a floor a conceivable floor would be playing like on a top line in AHL or being a really solid fourth line checking winger at the NHL level, because he does have that intensity. He has the will, the desire, the grit, and the physicality in terms of runway to grow into that kind of style. But in terms of player comps, there's three names I came up with that I think span a little bit the array of possibilities with this player at the NHL level. Starting things off, we're going to go with Anders Lee, another player who in his draft year was playing as a hockey player on the wing as well as a quarterback in high school. And he ended up deciding for hockey. And we can see what happened after that, right? High end goal scorer, guy who's very middle driven, captain of the New York Islanders. I mean, thighs like tree trunks. He's a physical specimen. I think West could get to a similar level in terms of upside. I think in terms of the way he plays, Mason West is a bit more of a lateral thinker, where like Anders Lee is a very north-south heavy kind of guy. But I also think that kind of style of play is something that Mason West could be channeled toward as well at the NHL level. Next, we have Oliver Bjorkstrand, which I think might be my favorite comp in terms of just kind of balancing the upside and the floor with Mason West. I think that they have some similarities. I mean, West is bigger, certainly, but in terms of deftness and playmaking and mobility and just being really fluid on puck, these two players have some real things in common. They both come up with really solid ideas, but I also remember with Oliver Bjorkstrand earlier on in his NHL career, I don't remember his draft year, but in terms of his NHL career, also a similar thing in terms of sound ideas, but execution lacking sometimes. So I think that Mason West has some similarities with Bjorkstrand as well. And last but not least, I have Yoel Armia of the Montreal Canadiens. And this is more if the upside doesn't fully hit with Mason West, if he settles into a bottom six checking winger, but has still that level of size and fluidity and deftness with the puck on a stick and a hard shot. Like Yoel Armia, in terms of watching Montreal Canadiens practices, looks like a top six caliber player. Wicked shot, disgusting hands, really, really big, a great puck protector, all these elements that should make him a higher end NHLer than he has been. But instead, he's become a really, really, really good bottom six winger for the Montreal Canadiens, a player I've loved watching genuinely over the course of the past 5 years, who's just constantly making smart defensive decisions, PK specialist, guy who plays with pace and was also able to rebound from some mental health struggles, got sent down to the AHL and ended up working with a psychologist or a therapist and really rebounded as well afterwards. But he was also a guy who got selected in the first round with a lot of this hype of top six upside. I think that Mason West could have a similar career path if that skill doesn't fully hit at the NHL level. And what helps there, still getting a valuable NHL piece. And look, if Yoel Armia were to go in a redraft in his draft year, you'd still be picking him in the second round. So it's more than worth taking a shot on Mason West, in my opinion. But to wrap up the show, let's talk about a couple potential team fits on draft day. And there's three teams that I highlighted here. First, we have the Nashville Predators, who select at 35th overall. The Preds love going for upside, especially under the Barry Trotz regime. And I think that balancing upside with size and youth would make him a really intriguing profile for this team. And the Preds have not shied away from selecting players from lower quality leagues in the past, whether it be high school or like the BCHL, for instance. I mean, I remember as well for Aiden Fink's draft year there in 2023, who was playing with the Brooks Bandits in the AJHL. He got drafted in the 7th round by the Nashville Predators and then progressed to being a point-a-game player with Penn State in his freshman campaign in the NCAA. And then this past season scored 53 points in 40 games there. So they've definitely had some luck with taking swings on guys from lower level leagues who then move on to college and build on their tools, play big roles, play big minutes, and also really are able to expand their offensive toolkits. And I think Mason West would fit in really nicely in that scenario. scenario. Then we have the Buffalo Sabres, another team that just needs some more size and upside combination, and they're selecting at 39th overall. I think that's very much within the range where Mason West should be going, and Buffalo has been very, very clear in their desire to get bigger, get dirtier, get like more physical. So selecting Mason West, would not be surprised to see them channeling him very much down that power forward like development lane to build on the physicality, be a bit more dirty, gritty, get inside contact a bit more, and just crash the net front. That would be, I think, a really interesting landing spot for Mason West. But last but not least, we have the Utah Hockey Club at 46th overall, a team that loves selecting their big boys and also don't shy away from selecting players who are big but have yet to fill out their frame, whether that be in terms of just weight on paper or in terms of habits, like it is with Mason West. I think he'd be a really good fit there with Utah. They have a lot of big boys, and he's also a guy I think that could fit in nicely in a middle six capacity down the stretch for that team. But I'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on Mason West as a prospect and the risk associated with a guy that has two sports? I mean, of course, this should be decided before the draft, but where do you stand right now on his value at the draft? I would love to hear your thoughts, as well as which NHL players remind you of him, whether you've watched him or just listened to this episode. Your opinions are definitely valued in the comments down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the show. And for your second listen, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. That's all for me today. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thanks so much for tuning in as always, and I hope to catch you tuning in again very, very soon.